1. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Sean Williams. This is another broadcast with Campbellsville University's senior seminar team. We are here today to talk about the conflict in Kashmir, which, if you've been joining us for the last couple of broadcasts, is a pretty big deviation from some of the discussions we've been having recently. I'm joined today by a new panel of guests. We have one returning with us who was on the two previous broadcasts, Mr. Jordan Sharrow. Jordan, it's good to see you again this morning.
Thank you.
And then we also have joining us four new panelists who are experts in the topic of Kashmir and Kashmiri politics. As they appear on my screen from top to bottom, we have Mr. Howard Smith. Howard, how are you today?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Also joining us is Alex Parker. Alex, welcome.
Thank you.
We have Malcolm Walker. Malcolm, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
Doing fantastic. And last but not least, rounding up our crowd is Hunter Kelly. Good morning, Mr. Kelly.
Good morning to you.
So to get started, and let's begin by, first of all, letting the viewers know exactly what we're talking about. Because other than maybe hearing about Kashmir as a fabric, which isn't even spelled the same way, I would imagine that most of our guests don't really know where Kashmir is or why we're even talking about it. So this is a question just for anybody. Where exactly is Kashmir, and why is this something that we're discussing?
So Kashmir is on the northern border of India and Pakistan, and is southwest of China. They originally were a British colony, or British controlled them, and in 1947 they gained their independence for the first time.
So for anybody, why is this a topic that we're interested in? Why are we more interested in Kashmir than any of the other states in India?
Well, I think the big thing with it was they had to basically decide after the British left where they wanted to go, who they wanted to join, and that became kind of a big issue. And now for the last 70 plus years, India and Pakistan have been kind of fighting on and off over who's going to control the area and who's going to get to use it for its benefit. And that's kind of why it's remained in the news and why we're talking about it.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Jordan said, in 1949, there was a ceasefire between Pakistan and India on who will get Kashmir. And even before the British India, downfall, the region was completely still highly contested.
So fast forward to today, or maybe not quite fast forward yet. Something that one of y'all had said, you said that Kashmir was allowed to make its own decisions about independence. So was Kashmir invaded by India? Was it conquered by India? Did it join India willingly? How did Kashmir come to be part of India?
Kashmir came to be part because originally the leader of Kashmir at the time, he wanted to be independent, but for security against Pakistan, because Pakistan was very aggressive on trying to get Kashmir, they end up acceding to India for that security. So that's how I basically end up being with India and partnering and basically being a part of India and their government.
Why was Pakistan so interested in Kashmir? And I think this answer is starting to get us to more to the present day and why this is an issue. What is it about Kashmir's culture or its history that makes Kashmir attractive to Pakistan, or maybe the other way around, that makes Pakistan more attractive to some Kashmiris?
I'll go ahead. Pakistan was actually created because of their Muslim majority. They were actually a minority in the Indian subcontinent, and when the British rule broke up, Pakistan was created for that Muslim minority, which became the majority. So like Pakistan, Kashmir actually has a Muslim majority, and Pakistan, when Kashmir was given that choice to either accede to one of the new nations, Pakistan was pushing for Kashmir to join them because of the Muslim majority. And then they invaded, and then Kashmir turned to India for military help.
If I'm not wrong, the leader of Kashmir at the time was a Hindu, and that may have had a lot to do with him deciding to side with India as well.
So a situation where the elites in the region were different from the population of the region, and you end up getting this kind of social conflict. So then what are the concerns of the Kashmiri population today? Are these religious tensions still very real, or have some of the concerns shifted to other issues?
I think these concerns are still relevant today. I think they personally fear for their lives is one primary concern. And then another concern is their freedom. They're trying to gain access to freedom. So I think that's what they're pretty much focused on as Kashmir civilians right now.
Also, currently, the domicile certificate that the Indian Prime Minister actually revoked is it's a certificate where non-Kashmir residents are able to get government jobs and things of that nature, which also affects the Kashmir population, because usually you will want the people in the Kashmir government as residents of Kashmir. Now you have non-resident of Kashmir being able to get government official jobs, which also affects the population and the concern of what's going on in Kashmir as well.
So that's, I guess, a little bit about what Kashmir is interested in. If the Kashmiri population doesn't want to be part of India, or if a significant portion of it doesn't want to be part of India, why is India so insistent on keeping Kashmir within the country? I mean, would it be in India's best interest to let Kashmir go and end the conflict altogether? Is there something there that they're wanting, or they're wanting to get out of it?
I think it's an ethnic base thing for India, and it's the same thing for Pakistan. Even starting back from 3rd BC, Kashmir was always thought of this high region, this region that had so many things that put forth for science and arts and all types of things. That's what came out of Kashmir. And so it gives them an identity of the history of like, well, this is where our people came from. We're a part of this and everything. And then all of a sudden, British India happens, and it's something that they were able to like hold close to. Just like, yeah, this is our people. We did these things. We, all these people that went to China, and China just, they thought of people that were from Kashmir as, these great people. Like in a golden age, this is where, if you expected something to happen, it came out of Kashmir.
Anyone else? Any other insights as to why India might be so intent on keeping a hold of Kashmir?
Well, not specifically, but just when you look at that logic in general, when people don't want to give up colonies or areas, it's the tax revenue, it's the amount of control you have in the region, stuff like that, that leads you to not want to give that to your biggest rival in Pakistan, and just to help that would give them an edge in the little conflict that they've had going on for so long.
Now, Mr. Smith, I think that you might have started to allude to this a little bit earlier, but one of the reasons why the conflict in Kashmir has come back into international focus is it seems that the current Indian regime, the Modi regime, who is the Prime Minister of India, that they have been changing some of the policies in Kashmir. Could you give the viewers at home a sense of some of the steps that India has been taking in the region that might have been resulting in increased hostilities between Indians and Kashmiri citizens?
Right. As far as the permissions before, obviously taken away of the article of 370, which is the domicile certificate given to non-residents of Kashmir, but also him just doubling down on the line of stance, basically line of control, That him doubling down on security of that for can you say terrorist groups? I guess terrorist groups such as Jaish Muhammad or the Army of Muhammad, which is a terrorist group that was backed by the Pakistani government, that was trained by the Pakistan military, and other such groups such as the HM. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's I'm not even going to attempt that, but there's the HM, the LET, such groups like that. That such groups like that. That also, it's just the terrorist groups against those people that that's have crimes against civilians in Kashmir. Even though the Kashmir population, it is mostly Muslim, so you would think that it would support some of the Pakistani movements, but it's also against crimes against civilians and their people, and there's also people that also support the Indian government, even though there are Muslim. But it's provisions such like that brings more tension with not just the people in Kashmir, but Pakistan as well. It just creates a higher tension that could lead to a possibly fourth war. So it's things of that nature.
You mentioned Pakistan, and I guess you insinuated that maybe the Pakistani government was supporting insurgent groups in the region.
Right.
Has Pakistan long been involved or frequently been involved in the domestic affairs inside of Kashmir, or is this something that's relatively recent? And this is open to anybody.
Well, as far as me, it's as recently they've been heavily involved in what's going on, but as far as in the past, it's more been just groups acting on their own, and then they come to the Pakistani government, which helps them. Like as far as former president of Pakistan, he says he turns a blind eye, as and like in quotations, basically saying like he was using the militant groups to engage negotiation with India and try to get more land or even all of Kashmir. Just another tactic that seems relatively cheaper than Pakistan using their own military forces and trying to do things like invade or start another conflict with India. So it's been a little minute of where they're trying to do this.
In general, how effective do you guys think India has been in Kashmir under the current government? Do you think that their actions have helped to ease tensions in the region, or do you think that what they've actually done is antagonize the region?
I think they're mainly antagonizing the region. I read and did research, and they put out 700,000 troops in Kashmir to raise the influence that India has over the region. And 700,000 troops is equivalent to 1 troop for every 14 civilians. And honestly, that much influence and the things that they are being accused of committing to the civilians, I really consider them as being a very negative influence, and the policies that they're putting in place is really hurting the tensions with the Kashmir civilians and the Indian government.
I agree with what Hunter's saying. I think if you even look throughout history, it'll tell you that that's usually not a good idea. When you want to get influence, just flood the area with troops. It hasn't worked in Afghanistan. It didn't work in Vietnam. It's often a bad idea when you're trying to make people like you to flood the area with your army. It oftentimes just doesn't work out.
Has the tensions in Kashmir created problems between India and Pakistan? What is the relationship like between these two countries?
The relationship between Pakistan and Kashmir has been strained. You know, India has accused Pakistan of backing separatist militant groups, and which has caused on multiple terrorist attacks in Kashmir and the Indian parliaments. So, therefore, their relationship is completely strained.
I mean, I would have to think that for the international community, this would be of some concern, right? That having a nuclearly powered India right next door to a nuclear power Pakistan, who are engaged in this overt and covert conflict in Kashmir, that this would create some concern. Has there been a history, or are there any examples of the international community, either collectively or individual states, any history of them trying to get involved in the region, or has the rest of the world just sort of stepped back and watched?
Now, I do know that the United Nations have tried to step in, and they've issued some guidelines sent both to Pakistan and India based on the value of human rights. And Pakistan returned the comment stating that it did not pertain to them. And India has said it was all false accusations, no matter the evidence that was shown in front of them. So the United Nations has tried to ease the tensions in Kashmir between the two countries.
To expand on the UN's involvement, they first did establish a ceasefire line and sent military observers. A plebiscite was mandated by the UN in their resolution, but neither of the countries could actually agree on how to hold the plebiscite. So that actually failed, and both countries kind of determined that it was a bilateral conflict and didn't really want any third party involved up to this day.
When you said plebiscite, for the viewers at home, what exactly is a plebiscite, and what would it have accomplished had it been held?
So pretty much it would be a kind of a real specific vote that the citizens of, in this case, Kashmir, would actually vote on, and it would be over like a solution on which country they would accede to.
Do you think that something like a plebiscite or a national referendum, I guess that's similar to what happened with Brexit with the British, do you think that something like a plebiscite would be effective if held? Do you think that all the parties would honor whatever the wishes of the citizens were? Or do you think it'd basically just kind of be a pointless exercise?
At first, I want to say that Pakistan would be more likely to honor Kashmir's decision because of that Muslim majority versus India. Actually, India's kind of had a history of denying that there was even a problem. So the first step would be kind of both countries defining what the problem is and agreeing on the issue. And at this point, that's highly unlikely, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate. Okay, so if it's looking like the UN has tried to get involved and hasn't succeeded, if it looks like efforts at some kind of a domestic resolution where Kashmiri citizens or residents try to take care of their own future, if it looks like that's not going to be successful, are there any solutions to the problem? Is there something that can be done either externally or internally that might help to ease tensions? What do you guys think?
I think there's a lot of things you could suggest and a lot of ideas you could throw out there, a lot of external things you could do. But I think at the end of the day, the end all be all will be an internal solution that the two nations and Kashmir come up with together. I think as long as the solution is forced by an outside party, it'll never really be solved.
Anyone else? What do you think? Any potential solutions?
I'll take it on this. I'll say it'll have to be a little bit of both. It'll have to be a little bit of internal and external. I feel like internal, like Jordan said, it will have to be a negotiating between these two parties. They have to really sit down and come down with guidelines and negotiations to figure out this issue. But also, I feel like it takes an outside source to make sure these guys stay on the even keel. Because, like mentioned earlier, both of these countries are nuclear capable of attacks. And the last thing we need is for anybody to have that happen. Now, will it happen? Hopefully not. But it also takes an outside force to keep these two parties for starting another conflict that can endanger hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. So I think it takes a little bit of both of internal and external.
Any other views?
Yeah, I agree with what Howard said about kind of takes both. With both of these nations being nuclear powers, external kind of it's kind of what do you do without kind of starting a war? But internally, it's definitely going to take an agreement with both of these countries. I think that external forces should be mainly pressure.
What sort of pressure? I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying I agree with Alex and what my other colleague had to say, Howard. I think it would be an internal affair with external pressure. I don't necessarily agree that China would be the best third party external force because they have ambitions for the Himalayan control. So.
And I guess I could see why China would be logical, since China is sort of the major economic power in the region next to India. But you're right. As recently as a couple of months ago, the tensions between India and China itself were escalated. So I could certainly see why India wouldn't want China to get involved there. Now, if there was going to be some sort of a domestic solution, of course, part of the issue is you have to figure out what the problems are that have to be solved. One of the accusations that has come from Kashmiris is that India has been a sponsor of state terror. That effectively, that what India has been doing is trying to engage in sort of terrorist activities as a way of keeping the local population under control. Is there any evidence to support that argument that India is basically using force against their citizens, or is most of that just propaganda?
Well, first of all, I want to explain to the viewers what state-sponsored terror is. State-sponsored terror is terrorist actions that have been endorsed by the state, and in this case, it's terrorist actions against Kashmiris endorsed by India. And there has been cases, according to my research, in 2019, thousands of Kashmiri civilians, including shopkeepers, teachers, students, traders, and rights activists, were all arrested as an arbitrary arrest. An arbitrary arrest does fall under the topic of state-sponsored terror.
An arbitrary arrest, is this just literally people coming in and rounding up Kashmiri citizens? Is that what you're talking about, or is there more to it than that?
Right. That's exactly what they did in 2019.
That almost sounds like some of the same concerns that African American communities have. Is there a parallel there, or do you think that what's happening in India or what's happening in Kashmir is significantly or structurally different? And that question was open to anybody.
As far as that, I think as far as the visa, I think it's very structurally different because as far as what's going on with African Americans, it's more. I wouldn't say biased towards what's happening here because it's really two completely different situations. I wouldn't say completely different, but as far as what's happening to what India is being accused of and things of that nature, it's more of trying to gain control of the people in the population, trying to, I guess, basically control that area that they're trying to get fully control of. And as far as what's happening in America, it's more just like of a racial bias. It's a racial bias feel to it. It's more of a not really a control of an area, not really trying to take control of African Americans in the nation. It's more just, I guess, just a racial bias.
I agree with what Howard said, but I also think that there is a relatively similar like structure at hand. But I just think it's at a lot more extreme level and a lot more cases of this happening in Kashmir than what it is in America.
So if we think then about, I guess maybe to come back to Mr. Parker's argument or suggestion that we revisit having a plebiscite in Kashmir, is there evidence to suggest that the Kashmiri population has turned against India? Does India have any local support? Does it look like India can bring Kashmir fully back into the fold? Or do you think that the population just completely turned against the Indian government?
I don't believe that they completely turned against the Indian government, but I do believe that Kashmiris, they want independence. That is something that they've had independence after the partition of India. Both Pakistan and India both wanted to annex Kashmir, but them being a proud people, they want their own independence. So almost anything that like sways them or something that doesn't feel right, that India does, it makes them think like, well, maybe we should have stayed this way. Maybe we should have stayed independent and been our own state.
Yeah, as far as to touch on that, I think the relationships between the Kashmiri people and the Indian government has always been kind of iffy. But with that Article 370 they had, it was something that like I wouldn't say they could deal with. It was something they could tolerate because as being Kashmir, you had special citizenship, able to get government jobs and things of that nature. But now I think since that article is now gone, I think people are now it's really like it's real tension now. It's real dislike for the Indian government as much as more than what it was before. I think it's always been some sort of a dislike, but now I think the tension is heightened to where a change might actually happen soon.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Howard says. Revisiting the Article 370, um, when that was originally given to Kashmir, which gave them a special status under Article 370, they still had independence and was allowed to make their own decisions and laws, with a few exceptions. And when India revoked this just last year, I think this was really damaging to the population of Kashmir because I think it definitely takes away their autonomy of what little they had, and also kind of strips them of what identity that they also had. So I think that Kashmir, as the years go on, I think they're wanting action to be taken or something to be done to regain that autonomy along with their identity.
So we're about out of time, but I do want us to at least consider one final question, and I'll just pose this entire group, and we'll go around the table, the virtual table, and I'll give each of you a chance to answer it. So let's assume that the election is over, and regardless of who wins, the future president, whether it be a second Trump administration or a Biden administration, that the president decides that they want to make resolving the Kashmiri conflict one of their priorities. How would you advise the president? If the United States wanted to get involved, how would you suggest that we do that to help bring an end to the tensions? And Mr. Smith, let's just go ahead and start with you.
As far as the United States also is one of the superpowers of the world. So when you get involved in this sort of type of domestic conflict, you have to be real careful because getting involved in this, you can spur other people getting involved as well. Because also China has a play in this as well. So in doing this, I feel like we touched on earlier, it's more about applying pressure. But when you get into, deploying forces, or you're getting more involved in what's going on, you can trigger something that might turn into more than just Kashmir, the people of Kashmir. It can turn into more than India or Pakistan trying to annex Kashmir. It could turn into something that I'm not even going to mention because we don't want that to happen. But they just have to be really careful into how they get involved and how they do it. But if either President Trump or Joe Biden decides to get involved in the peacemaking of the situation, it should be more just applying pressure and also help the people in Kashmir as well. Um, this year still problems going on, and maybe even things like giving aid to people in Kashmir. They should do it as far as keeping peacemaking, so they can be on an even keel with Pakistan, India, and even the people in Kashmir. And that was my take on it.
Mr. Shero, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Howard was saying. I think the next president has to keep in mind the sensitivity of the issue at hand. And this could very clearly and easily evolve into a nuclear conflict if it's handled wrong. I don't think we're that far away from it. I think there's a few big things that would have to happen to get there. But I just think that we need to keep applying pressure to the area just to help them influence them towards coming together to make a change. And I think until we do that and they're ready to negotiate, there's not going to be a whole lot of change seen in the region.
Mr. Parker, what's your take? How would you advise the president?
So I totally agree with what Howard and Jordan has said so far about sensitivity of these two nuclear powers. I would definitely advise the next president against military action, any military action of any sort, and support negotiations and the pressure that we've been talking about. Speaking of China, I think that better relations need to be established between the U.S. and China, and maybe there can be a working together situation between the U.S. and China to pressure India and Pakistan to, agree on what this conflict is, first of all, and how to define it, and then how to go about negotiating and resolving it. Right now, I think there needs to be some humanitarian aid to the Kashmiri people for the first steps. So that's what I think.
Mr. Walker, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I agree with my other colleagues about the situation. I think the situation is sensitive. We don't want another situation just like what happened in the Middle East. Us backing militant groups or anything like that. The thought of being a third party, and just to piggyback off what Alex said, I think fixing relations with China would be something that would be helpful. And China fixing relations with India, or the same with Pakistan. China has ambitions, in the Himalayas, but that's another issue at hand. I think pressure is something that we should just do. Hey, you guys need to fix this. Advice and things of that nature. But any militant, spending of guns or money to back these groups will not be something that will be helpful.
Mr. Kelly, the final word.
Right. I agree with what they have said so far. Mainly, I would advise the next president to not really get involved in the conflict in Kashmir at this very moment, as it's really high tensions, and I feel like there's going to be a war breakout between India and Pakistan, and I don't think America should pick a side in it right now. We are not sound enough as a nation right now to go to war, in my opinion. But if we did want to get involved, I would really advise for just a pressure situation where you pressure India and Pakistan to come together and create a civilization, like create a civil boundary between Kashmir, India, and Pakistan, and hope that you could help them not go to an all-out war, because you don't know what kind of third-party nations that could come in and really make this another world war. I mean, a worst-case scenario.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me for today's conversation on Kashmir. We are just about out of time. And for those of you who are either joining us live or who have picked us up on streaming on YouTube, I want to thank you very much for watching our broadcast. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and check out our previous broadcasts on COVID-19 in Kentucky and the coronavirus in Europe. And also be sure to tune in on next Thursday and the following Thursdays as we transition from talking about more global affairs to discussing things like prison reform and also the single-payer healthcare system and whether or not it would be good for the United States. So until we see you guys, thank you and God bless.